All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that started out with the absolute best of intentions. It was this almost whimsical idea, literally bursting with color and civic pride. But, well, it ultimately spiraled into an absolute nightmare. We're heading back to 1986 to break down the infamous Cleveland balloon disaster. And honestly, it is just a fascinating, if sobering, look at exactly what happens when massive human ambition just completely collides with uncontrollable natural forces. So the big question we have to answer today is this: how exactly did a charity event, one that was specifically designed to save a struggling city's reputation, end up literally bringing its infrastructure to a grinding halt and, tragically, costing 2 men their lives? It's a story dripping with tragic irony. To figure out how a spectacle meant for the history books turned into a total disaster, we really got to start at the beginning. Section 1. The plan to rebrand Cleveland. Okay, let's dive into this and look at Cleveland's really desperate need to just completely reinvent its public image at the time. So back in the mid-1980s, Cleveland was dealing with a pretty rough reputation. You might have even heard the nickname. People actually called it the mistake on the lake. Ouch, right? City leaders were absolutely desperate to shake that image and prove Cleveland was a thriving world-class city. Now contrast that with what was happening over on the West Coast. The year prior, in 1985, Disneyland had just snagged a shiny new Guinness World Record for the biggest simultaneous balloon launch. The organizers at the United Way of Cleveland looked at that and thought, bingo. A massive, colorful PR stunt seemed like the perfect ticket to outdo Disneyland and kickstart Cleveland's comeback. But here's the thing. To beat Disneyland, they couldn't just go a little bit bigger. They had to go massive. We are talking about an incredibly ambitious plan to launch nearly 1.5 million balloons over the city. Literally, just let that number sink in for a second. 1,500,000 balloons. The sheer absurd scale of this whole operation meant they were stepping into completely uncharted logistical territory. I mean, think about what it actually takes to get 1.5 million balloons ready for a single day. A day they dubbed Balloonfest, scheduled for September 27th, 1986. This took 6 solid months of intensive planning. Infrastructure-wise, they actually had to build a giant net, literally the size of a city block, just to hold the balloons down while they were being inflated. And the labor involved is just staggering. We're talking thousands of volunteer hours to manually fill every single one of those balloons with helium. The dedication was off the charts, and you can imagine, the whole city was just buzzing with excitement. Section 2, Storm and Missing Men. But as the city was gearing up for this massive triumph, a very different and frankly ominous situation was starting to unfold just to the east. The night before Balloonfest, Mother Nature decided to throw a wrench in the plans. A brutal storm rolled through, kicking off a severe thunderstorm watch until 1 a.m. But here is where the story turns tragic. About an hour before that violent storm hit, 2 men had gone out fishing on Lake Erie. By the morning of September 27th, the exact day Cleveland was supposed to be celebrating, those 2 men were reported missing by their families. Their boat was found completely abandoned on the lake. Authorities suspected the rough weather had knocked them overboard, so the Coast Guard immediately kicked off a desperate search and rescue operation. Meanwhile, completely isolated from that terrifying reality playing out on the water, downtown Cleveland was in absolute party mode. Over 100,000 people had packed into Public Square. They were thrilled because, hey, it looked like the skies had cleared. The night storm had seemingly passed, and this massive crowd was just eagerly waiting for the big show, completely unaware of the life-or-death struggle happening just a few miles away on the lake. Section 3, the record-breaking launch. Let's see how this builds, because the organizers were about to be backed into a really tough corner. You see, those clear skies the crowd was cheering for? Total mirage. As the day went on, the weather suddenly shifted again. A brand new major rainstorm was rapidly closing in on the city. And here is the trap they were caught in. All 1.5 million balloons were already filled. They were actively straining against that massive city block-sized net. Rescheduling at this point was literally impossible. I mean, you can't exactly unfill 1.5 million helium balloons, right? So, staring down a storm that would completely ruin the event, the organizers made a split-second, fateful call. They decided to release the balloons early, ahead of schedule. And, for one brief, fleeting minute, it actually worked. It was magic. As one observer put it, there was no doubt about it, the launch was spectacular. When they finally let that net go, this colossal, incredibly vibrant cloud just surged into the sky, wrapping around the downtown skyscrapers. It was awe-inspiring. It was exactly the picture-perfect moment they dreamed of, a world record secured for Cleveland. But man, that triumph was about to evaporate in record time. Section 4. Mass chaos in the city. Because almost instantly, this beautiful spectacle morphed into something straight out of a disaster movie. The physics of what went wrong here is actually mind-blowing. The plan was supposed to be super simple. Helium balloons go up, they drift around for a bit, eventually deflate and fall harmlessly back to Earth one by one. But that incoming storm ruined everything. A sudden front of cold air and heavy rain slammed right into that massive balloon cloud. And because of that, instead of floating away to safely deflate, tens of thousands of these still fully inflated balloons were forcefully shoved right back down to the ground in these huge, dense clusters. The fallout was immediate, and it brought the city to its knees. The wind basically swept millions of these balloons straight toward Burke Lakefront Airport. Within minutes, the runways were so thickly covered in rubber that every single flight had to be grounded. But it wasn't just the airport. These descending balloons were hitting the streets, literally blinding drivers as they cascaded over windshields. This caused a whole string of car accidents. The balloon congestion on the asphalt got so bad that major roads had to be completely shut down. They actually had to wait for city bulldozers to come and plow the balloons off the streets, just absolute chaos. Section 5. The impossible rescue mission. Now, while the city is dealing with the bizarre reality of bulldozing balloons, we have to look back at the lake, where this logistical nightmare took on a deeply tragic weight. Out on Lake Erie, remember, the Coast Guard was still frantically searching for those 2 missing fishermen. And in just a devastating twist of fate, this massive balloon launch, the very thing meant to celebrate and uplift the city, ironically became the single biggest obstacle in the desperate effort to save those 2 lives. The organizers always knew some balloons would end up in the water. They had actually planned for about 10% of them to eventually land on Lake Erie. Because that storm forced them down so quickly, a staggering 60% of the 1.5 million balloons crashed directly onto the lake. We're talking hundreds of thousands of brightly colored, bobbing orbs totally blanketing the surface of the water, right in the exact search grid the Coast Guard was using. A Coast Guard official on the scene described the nightmare perfectly. They said, "It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack here. Can you imagine trying to find somebody floating out here, or even spotting a life jacket with all these balloons on the water?" Think about it. A human head or a brightly colored orange life vest looks exactly like a brightly colored helium-filled balloon bobbing in the waves. The rescue helicopters, the boats, they were completely visually blinded by the exact same stunt the city was cheering for. And sadly, the search ended in tragedy. On September 27th, the Coast Guard fought through that balloon-covered water for hours, just unable to see anything through the colorful debris. 2 grueling days later, on September 29th, authorities had to make the agonizing call to officially suspend the search. The men were lost. And shortly after that, the bodies of both missing fishermen tragically washed ashore. Section 6. The end of balloon records. This whole event left a permanent, unerasable mark on the city and on the history books. Let's look at the ultimate legacy of Balloonfest. In this really dark, bittersweet twist of reality, Cleveland actually got exactly what it set out to achieve. Balloonfest was officially featured in the 1988 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. They did it. They beat Disneyland and launched the most balloons simultaneously in human history. But man, it was such a hollow victory. The record was forever tainted by the chaos, the crazy property damage, and of course the tragic loss of 2 lives. The fallout was so severe, in fact, that the 1988 edition was the one and only time the Cleveland event was ever featured. Shortly after that book came out, the Guinness organization made a really definitive ruling. They permanently ended the mass balloon launching category altogether. Because of the massive logistical failure, the terrible environmental impact, and above all, the loss of life, Guinness decided they would never ever encourage a stunt like this again. So the record stands, but literally no one is allowed to challenge it. Which brings us to our final takeaway for this explainer. The 1986 Cleveland balloon disaster started as this hopeful charity drive, just a fun attempt to lift a city's spirits. But it really forces us to ask, when does our pursuit of spectacular, world record ambition cross the line into dangerous, unpredictable hubris? It is just a stark reminder that no matter how meticulously we plan things, nature always has the final say. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive helped unravel the complexities behind what is truly an unforgettable moment in history. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.